Hello, and welcome to our E-Town special, Preserving Eatonton, a three-part series where we discuss the various houses and the journey that Jim Marshall and Lynn Remine have taken to preserving these homes. Here in episode 2, we will be discussing the various house styles and the different design choices used throughout the course of Eatonton's history. Here's what they had to say.
So when talking about the different house styles, or the architectural style houses, it's the vocabulary used to classify the buildings based on their structure, material, and the date in which they were built. But explain to me the difference between a high style house or a vernacular style house.
Okay, it sounds like a real complicated question, but it's really, really simple. High style refers to an academic interpretation of a style. That would be, say, in the 1850s when the Greek style swept the South. There were pattern books that were put out by all of the major architects in England and in the North that gave examples of different, styles and dimension drawings that they could actually, local contractors could actually copy exactly from those pattern books. So it's an academic approach to a style. Vernacular means locally interpreted.
Okay.
So that's when you would have a contractor, and the one that comes to mind most readily is Mr. Charles D. Leonard, who was our Victorian porch contractor. And
I'm assuming that's what he was known for doing.
That was what he was famous for, that and his Victorian cottages, because he got into the business right as the Victorian, the late 1880s, early 90s Victorian boom hit Eatonton. And he was available, ready, had a good crew, did good work, was honest, responsible. So people just went crazy with him. So that's when we lost a lot of our two-story federal-style porticos and got Victorian one-story long porches across the front. So the vernacular means a local interpretation of a style by an academically untrained carpenter or builder.
Someone that was local.
Right, exactly.
And does that contribute to everything that's from the exterior of the house, or does it include the interior as well?
Both, interior and
okay.
exterior. The academic styles like the Ezell house that we sometimes call the Painted Lady, the Queen Anne Victorian, would be a classic example right out of a pattern book with, and you could pick and choose which elements you wanted to include. So there was some leeway that a local carpenter architect would have in designing a property. But that one comes to mind as probably the most classic or most academic rendition of Queen Anne in Middle Georgia, really. And it's a beautiful home inside and out with, the details inside just as beautiful as the ones outside.
The wood features.
The wood, carved wood and that kind of thing.
So with the Ezell house, I noticed that it had that beautiful garden in the background. Tell me, what are some of the challenges that you both have faced with, do you have to worry about preserving the gardens as well as the house, or is it mainly just the house that you have to worry about?
The focus is primarily on the architecture of the property itself, because almost all of our original gardens have been lost. There's very little left. Yeah, on this property, for example, the only thing left of the original boxwood alley that went all the way to the street and the row of oaks, and then out from that were the huge crepe myrtles that we still have, a lot of them in the front and the back. So they're the only property in Eatonton that has anything closely resembling its original layout, and this would be a 1909 garden. So the Jenkins, the Gothic, what appears to be a Gothic revival house, was moved back about 600 feet from where its original site was.
Really?
At the intersection of the Avenue, which was their private street until 1936, and the Crossway, which is carriageway, which was their carriage drive to the house, hence the name of that new street. P.J. Berkman's from Augusta, whose home is now the clubhouse for Augusta National Golf Club, was Georgia's first aggressive landscape gardener. He was not trained, but he had a great sensitivity to how plants could be used to help define exterior spaces. And so he actually was the one that did the layout for that property, and they have the original drawing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
a lot of the original plants are still there, some of which you can't even buy today. They've gone out of usage because
Same
today,
with Nola Hall. He was a botanist. Dr.
Right.
Hunt was a botanist, so a lot of his original plants were there. But to Jimmy's point, you know, there are historic gardens, and preservation does cover those, and you know, they do urge us to keep them, those keep gardens. But we have lost so much of the original gardens that were here. But there are pieces and bits like the that are still here, like the one that he was talking about
Yeah.
at the Gothic Jenkins house. But the like the Queen Anne, that was put in by the owners. The beautiful garden in the back was put in, the current owners. And the behind the Greek Revival house, that was put in by a current owner, I mean a past owner. And so we're lucky that we've got beautiful gardens coming back.
well, and part of the sense of place in the local environment includes street trees.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of the ancient oaks that were planted, but when this town was laid out in shortly after 1808, in the original minutes of the town of Eatonton, they created an incentive plan to get people to plant trees. And if they would plant a certain number of trees, and they specified the kind, a certain distance apart, and keep them watered for 2 years, they would get a discount on their property taxes from the county. Yeah.
Wow.
And we still have all of the wonderful Dutch elms that we have remaining. Of course, a lot of them have, are on their way out because of the Dutch elm disease. But all of those were put in by the Jenkins family prior to 1909 when that house was moved. And so I ran across a reference in an 1825, I think it was, diary of a lady who had come to visit friends in Eatonton. And she wrote in the diary, she said, arriving in Eatonton is like driving one's carriage through tunnels of the living green, because there were so many street trees. And the obvious reason was for shade and that kind of thing, because nobody had air conditioning, so you needed to block out the sun as much as you could.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we're really fortunate to have that. And then major examples like this wonderful deodar cedar in my yard, planted in 1919, and others in town like that at the Alexander Sidney Reed House, that were part of the original landscape, that the trees and some of the ancient flowering trees like the crepe myrtles, best example, I think, of things remaining. The reason we have those.
Yeah. Now, what I find interesting is not just one of these houses, but at least 10 of these first-generation houses were moved from their original location. Tell me, how is that even possible, and what does it take to do something like that? The Abercrombie house was one of those houses, correct?
Right. And Lynn will talk a little bit about that, but Abercrombie was actually moved to accommodate a new subdivision that was opened in 1854 by a man named, and this is really his name, he came here from Nova Scotia, and his name was Tunis Tunison. He was a master brick mason.
Try saying that 5 times fast.
That's right. Master brick mason, and built Slade Hall, the Temperance Hall, the Branch Bank, all of those late 1840 buildings. And amassed enough money to buy the property all the way from Magnolia Street out to where Lower Harmony Road is, and divided that into 4-acre tracts and started building houses. And Abercrombie sat at an angle about 4 football fields northeast of it, and the driveway and the tree-lined avenue came all the way over to Jefferson Street. So that messed up his subdivision layout, which was going to be the next street over, was also laid out in 4-acre tracts all the way out. And so it meant, that's when that house was moved, 1854, brought over, and it is a transitional federal style house. But the interesting thing to me is that they rebuilt it as an oat house, H-A-U-T, meaning tall house, over a raised basement. So it's got a brick floor basement, which we used as part of the new apartment complexes.
So was the basement included in the move process, or was that left behind?
It would have been left behind, and then the house jacked up and a new basement built under it lined with brick.
I had a hard time picturing this because at one time, think about where it was. There's now a train track there,
Which wasn't there.
Which wasn't there in 1854, right?
So it was just a pancake flat move straight across. I mean, on an angle.
Tell them how they did that, though. That was
Well, they would jack them up and use large pine trees trunks and put them under the house. And as it moved forward, being pulled by oxen or mules, as a trunk got free, they would run it back and put it back in the front.
Move the log in front of it, yeah.
So just kept repeating that. That was a unique situation of a reason to be moved. Most of them were moved because they were the first generation houses, the federal or plantation plain style houses that were built facing the main streets right near the sidewalk, which was not there, it was just a mud path. And then the people they would buy 2 lots back to back all the way through to the next street. And this was in a time when you couldn't, if you ran out of eggs, you couldn't run to Piggly Wiggly and pick some up or whatever you needed. You had to provide it on site. So they would use that back lot area for gardens and chicken houses and things like that. And then as the taste changed and the houses got older and older and run down, they would just pick them up and move them back and then build, a newer house, on the original location. So in some of those situations, it also included burials in the backyard.
Oh. We
know where 11 are that are still there, except one got moved, or one shovel full of dirt got moved to Pine Grove.
Well, when Bill, the Abercrombie house is one that we looked at that is being restored right now, which we're all so thrilled about because it is such an early house. And when the Mr. Brewer from Atlanta, who is the preservationist that's working on that house, as they peeled back the layers on that house, they found numbered logs and numbered wood pieces to show that as they would number the pieces after moving them, so they'd know where to put them back, just like you do a log house. But this was not a log house, so I was interested in that, Jimmy.
Well, actually, the major timbers in this house are numbered. We found that out when we took the siding off to redo that. The major seals, like the 18-inch square corner seals that run 26 feet tall on all the corners, were actually milled in Augusta and brought over. And that's why they're stamped with a number.
Okay.
And I remember the first time this house was on tour in 1987, I think it was, for a Christmas tour. My brother, who was in the construction business, had done a lot of the restoration work, was a docent, and he announced to everybody that came in that this was Eatonton's first prefab house. I had to go. He was in the upstairs bedroom, and as soon as somebody told me that, I had to go up and correct that story. But I think when I left, he probably kept telling it, knowing John. But that was, the primary reasons is that the houses had originally been deep lots. And that's an easy example is the Davis house, where the plain style house was moved back, and then a newer, actually Queen Anne house, and now a new front on that is a classic, neoclassic or classic revival front was done. So, and then
the house across the street.
And then the Jenkins house at the north end of the avenue was moved simply because when the daughter of the family, Miss Carey, came home from being educated in England, her mother had sold off lots all the way down the avenue on either side, and Miss Carey pitched a fit and just said, "Mama, the community is encroaching on us. We've got to move." And so they rolled the house back, and poor Judge Jenkins actually died while some of the stories say, in the bathtub where he was sleeping as the house was being moved in 1909. So anyway, that's kind of an odd
That's definitely
reason.
a new one. I've never heard of somebody going out in that
A different
way
reason to
before.
move a house, but
A curse.
right. So that's a fascinating property.
So let's discuss a little bit about the different various house styles. The federal style houses were the first generation houses, right? And they were built
correct.
somewhere between 1815 and 1830?
Right. With most of them being built between about the end of 1817 through about 1820, 21. And then we had a few that we call plain style transition houses that were done as late as the 1830s, and Tolliver is a good example of that, and then remodeled in 1914 to have the elaborate classic revival detail that it has today. Right. But they started out with one-story cottages, 2 rooms on the first floor with an attic space for children, and then a shed room across the back that was usually just workspace, with a runway, elevated runway to a detached kitchen because of the threat of fire. The kitchen was always built to the back. And those houses that were actually 2-story federal or plantation plain style were referred to in the early deeds as mansion houses. It's like the Wiley Abercrombie house on up until after Miss Augusta Ross, sold it in her heirs in 1914. Was in every deed the Wiley Abercrombie mansion house. Michael Dennis's house, even after Joseph Addison Turner died and his wife, who had inherited it, and it was sold, it was called the Michael Dennis Mansion House. All of those early or first generation houses were a frame construction, simply because we didn't have a brickyard that early. We did later on have a brickyard by the 1830s, and a lot of the chimneys in homes after that, and some of the big houses like Slade Hall, all of the brick were made in what's now the Piggly Wiggly sink.
Yeah.
That was a brickyard, and they were actually fired here. The other brick pit and firing site was in what's now Jenkins Woods, up past the Gothic house in the woods. The hole is still there. So with those exceptions, but a lot of the end chimneys, which the federal and the federal with plantation plain style
And
elements,
this is a plantation style house too,
with
is that
federal
correct?
influences.
With federal
Right,
influences,
and the inside, for example, this mantel with its attached reeded columns and detail is a high style federal mantel. And in a lawsuit that we discovered in the courthouse papers between Mr. James Curry, who was the actual contractor, and Mr. Shackelford, Curry had sued for non-payment of the 3rd layer of pine shingles on the roof for Mr. Shackelford not paying for them, and 3 turkeys that he'd provided. And as part of the suit, Curry had to describe everything that he had bought and went in this house. Very unusual to have that kind of documentation.
Interesting.
So he described that the mantles were, fine mantles imported from Augusta. I think it was interesting to use the word imported. Today we just say we bought them in Augusta, and things like that. The siding on most of them was what we call the beaded bottom edge siding, which just gave a little decorative shadow pattern on them.
So with chimneys like this, I know most plantation houses, they had 2 large chimneys on both ends of the houses,
Correct.
right? Now, was there a particular reason for that, or was that more of like an aesthetic choice? Was that for heating reasons, or?
It was both. They looked nice. It's what people had been used to when they moved from the Virginia, area, because you found this style house. And still, if you go into Tidewater, Virginia, you'll find them all over the place. Thank goodness they've come into their own and are being restored there. But the primary reason was for the heat.
Okay.
Of course, the heat source was, open wood fires. And these fireplaces are what they call a Count Rumsford design, which is a shallow fireplace with exaggerated angled ends. And they were designed in 1799 by a man named Benjamin Thompson, who was Lord Rumsford. Been born and raised in England, came to the United States, and was just appalled at how cold everybody was. They were building these terrible fireplaces that didn't put out heat. So he actually invented that. So fortunately, our houses, most of them in the federal style, fell into the Count Rumsford. That was the dynamite new thing that everybody had to have in their 1818, 1820 houses.
Does the Preservation Commission have any struggles retaining the chimneys with the original brick?
We certainly encourage them. Sadly, through the years, a lot of the interiors, have been covered up, or they've had gas, put in and things like that. Another thing about the federal houses, that you can spot are the window panes.
Mhm.
The window panes, and you'll notice on federal homes, the window panes are small. They're like 9/9.
Yeah,
And one of the reasons is because glass was so expensive to make, and they could not make huge pieces of glass like they could later on. So that's one of the first things you can spot with a federal house, of the sizes of.
And they were double
panes.
sashed, right?
Yeah.
No, these are,
No.
the top sash is fixed.
Okay.
No weights. So that's the reason you'll find the old glass intact in the top sash, because people would drop the lower sash
Yeah.
and the glass would break and it was replaced.
Oh, okay.
I think one of the most interesting things, the reason these houses didn't have closets, was we came across something where you were taxed based on the number of rooms in your house, and a
Oh,
closet
really?
counted as a room.
So you just have like coat hangers then,
And
right?
When this house was,
wardrobe,
when this-
like a wardrobe, like that.
Yeah.
when this house was built, the only closet was under the staircase, and it's still there and still has its box lock, the back of it on the back of the door.
It's amazing when you think about the interiors and how like you have to find workaways just to like having a wardrobe as opposed to just a closet just to get around that kind of thing.
And it was the same with glass. If you went larger than the 8x10, you were taxed on, exaggerated additions. Anyway, we were just so lucky to find that lawsuit against Mr. Shackelford, because it even talked about the 3 layers of pine shingles. I had no idea that you had to have 3 layers. But you started out, the first layer was grade 3, then you put grade 2, and then the top layer was the fine ones that had no knots and would never curl or wrinkle or.
So what kind of process do you have to go through to like get the original glass that was with the house?
If we normally don't get that detailed
Right.
with it,
Okay.
we're just so glad that they've
Replaced.
Replaced it, yeah.
restored the basic house.
Yeah, and the profile is what you get in the framing,
Right.
of the windows. So that's what you see the most of.
It's the profile and not necessarily the same material.
Exactly.
Got it.
But if you've got the wavy glass, you certainly want, if you've got a bubble in it, it may look like a flaw, but that's a real.
Well,
It
that-
adds to the
That's a
value,
real
right?
To me,
Yeah.
that's the easiest thing it is to sell somebody on an antique thing, is that they already, when they see the wavy glass, they say, "Oh, this is real." Oh, and they say, "Oh, yes, it is," and so is everything else. In the house, real old.
Jimmy's talking about the information he got from that document, and think about it. We did not have photographs like we have now. And so the only way we can, that the early homes are hard, to
Document.
reproduce and stuff like that. When you're trying to, you have to find the documents that sort of explain those in Sanborn maps and things like that. It's like a detective case. You go and you find, it had a cat. The Sanborn map shows that it was 2 stories, or it had a balcony, and now all that's gone, and there was no photograph of it. So it's kind of fun when you're digging in. You've
Absolutely.
got somebody that knows what
Right.
they're doing.
You turn into an old house sleuth.
Right.
When we did the National Register District, we had to actually physically examine every property in the district. Some of the owners would let us go underneath, and that's when I
That's where you
discovered
find it.
that this was an old house, because it was covered up with asbestos shingles, had 6 mobile homes in the front yard and 7 in the side yard. And everybody just thought it was a trailer park, Now, one interesting tidbit about the end chimneys, we have, in several cases, we know that people would build what we call the plantation plane, or 2/2, meaning 2 rooms up, 2 rooms down, with a shed room across the back, in anticipation of doubling the size of the house at a later time, and they would put the fireplaces on the back wall. The bachelor house out on Lower Harmony Road
That way.
that our new dentist has got now is an example of that. Although they never got added, those extra rooms. So that's the only surviving example of that we have in this county, but you see it all over central Georgia and northeast Georgia.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching episode 2 of our Eatonton special, Preserving Eatonton. For more information, visit the links below. Join us next time for episode 3, where we conclude the various house styles and how outside influences affected Eatonton's perspective and a house's architectural design.